Support for WUWM podcast comes from Hop Harvest and Vine and Good Harvest Market in Pewaukee, part of One Destination, combining farm-to-table dining, local craft beers, and organic groceries under one roof. More at goodharvestmarket.com.
This is Capital Notes from Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Maayan Silver, speaking with J.R. Ross, editor of WisPolitics.com. Hi there, J.R. Welcome to Capital Notes.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I'd like to ask you about the U.S. strikes in Iran. There was a bipartisan resolution to block the Trump administration from continuing hostilities against Iran. As expected, U.S. Senators Tammy Baldwin and Ron Johnson were split on it. And the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel reports that there are Wisconsin National Guard troops stationed in the Middle East for the Iran operations. What are you watching for as to how this war could shake things up politically in our swing state?
Oh, it's just, for Republicans, they want to talk about affordability. They want to talk about how X, Y, and Z are going better than they were under Joe Biden and assure people that things are getting better, that, they were dealt this horrible hand by Joe Biden. They've cut taxes on the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. You're going to see a bigger tax return after you fire taxes by April 15th, et cetera, et cetera. The whole conflict in the Middle East is taking that attention away from that message, right? It's also, war is expensive. I've seen figures of, $2 billion a day, $1 billion a day, whatever it is, for this ongoing situation. That is not helping the perception about things getting better if you are a swing voter who just wants to afford, pay your grocery bill. Oh, and by the way, gas prices are going up. Now, it could be temporary. This thing could last a couple of weeks, whatever it ends up being. Politically, it's just more of a distraction from that core message about what's going on. And the more you distract people, harder to get them convinced by late summer that things are going better. And in my conversations with people in recent weeks, all I've heard are that, you can't just tell voters that things are going better. They have to feel it. And the rough guess is people have to feel it by sometime late summer. Because once you get past that, it's kind of locked in. And if they're not feeling it by then, you're probably going to be in a little bit of trouble if you're a Republican.
So to make a summary of this, you think that it's distracting from the ability of Republicans to make their case about affordability now that they're on the hot seat in these midterm elections?
Yeah, I know. I'm just talking about the political piece. But look, I'm not a foreign policy expert. I'm not getting into all the back and forth about justification for it or not. I'm just talking about the reality on the ground of what's happening in these campaigns, which is that they want to talk about a certain topic, and the more the focus is on foreign affairs, the less attention there is on getting people to feel like things are going better for them in their personal lives.
And as a side note, in the Marquette poll in the past few decades that I've seen of Wisconsin voters, foreign policy is usually pretty low on the list of priorities. To what extent has actual foreign events and foreign policy had an impact on Wisconsin elections?
No, 06, the Iraq War, huge. I mean, that kind of wave election that was fueled in part by what's going on with George Bush, his decisions in the Middle East, that was a huge influence in that election. And it drove Democratic turnout and produced a massive blue wave that changed things significantly. So, yeah, there are definitely ways it influences what's going on, even if it's not the top concern for people, especially a year like now where we keep seeing the Marquette poll, that affordability is the number one issue by far.
And it can have sort of an indirect impact, like in terms of overall support or opposition to a candidate or party. Like some argue that the Israel-Palestine conflict affected support for Kamala Harris, for instance.
Absolutely. And to tie it back to affordability, look, the longer this goes on, the more gas prices go up, the more you're undercutting the affordability argument, right? People are going, wait a second, what's going on? I was promised, all these things would be cheaper under President Trump. And if they're not, that's going to be a problem for him to make a pitch to people this fall to keep Republicans in power.
Moving on to the Wisconsin Supreme Court race. At the end of February, more than 60% of registered Wisconsin voters hadn't made up their minds about the April Supreme Court race. And to remind people, both candidates, there's liberal-backed Chris Taylor and conservative-backed Maria Lazar. Both are currently appellate judges. The election is Tuesday, April 7th. What do people need to know at this stage in the game?
Well, this race has been kind of quiet, especially compared to the last couple ones. It's almost been like a quote-unquote normal Supreme Court race, right? Pre-2023, our races for the Supreme Court weren't that expensive. All of a sudden, boom, 2023, race for control of the court. Or was it either $56 or $65 million, $56 million spent on that race that I counted. 2025, control for the court again, $115 million spent for my calculations on that race. That is unusual. We used to have much more quiet affairs, and we're having a quiet affair, but it's been driven by a couple things. One, it's not for control of the court, ideologically speaking. There's a fourthly liberal majority. This is for the seat of retiring conservative justice, Rebecca Bradley. So it's not going to influence who's in the majority, all right? Two, conservatives are looking at their track record in recent spring elections going, this isn't really worth it right now to spend the money here. They lost by double digits in 2025, 2023, and 2020. Oh, and also in 2018. The exception has been 2019, when it was a kind of a quiet race. There wasn't really a big surge of interest among liberal voters, and there was this kind of like late rush of conservative money that helped Brian Hagedorn win. Caught Democrats off guard a little bit. But overall, conservatives are going, this really isn't a great environment for us anymore in the spring. We don't feel like spending money if we're not going to have a great shot to win. So looking at other numbers besides the Marquette poll, I'm seeing ad buys, for example, and they're heavily in favor of Chris Taylor right now. I check independent expenditure reports, which are things like when you get mail pieces, when you get like somebody knocking on your door or people canvassing, like I see those efforts. There's not much going on right now on the conservative side. And talk to my sources on that side of the aisle, they just aren't feeling an enthusiasm to go out there and work this race because of what's happened recently. So does not mean this race is over by any stretch of the imagination. The Marquette poll shows people are undecided. Now, there are other ways I would do a poll specifically about an April election than how that was done maybe. If you want to get like in a polling geek world when it comes to like methodology. But what you do see in that poll as well is that Democrats, generally speaking, are about 6 points more enthusiastic to vote in April than Republicans. That's that built-in advantage I talked about in the spring election anymore, where Republicans used to have the advantage every spring because these high turnout, high propensity voters were Republicans, suburbanites, kind of the old alignment. Donald Trump has realigned things where those rural, more populist voters used to be Democrats, now Republicans. That's kind of more the Republican base. They don't typically turn out in spring elections. Those college-educated suburbanites and urban voters are more likely to do it. It's just the way it is. So now Democrats have that advantage every spring. So right now you say advantage goes to Chris Taylor, though it's not a done deal because operatives keep telling me, don't forget 2019. If there's somebody who wants a big check last week's that race, it could change things dramatically because there's just not that much attention on it, one, and there's not like a prohibitive amount of money spent so far to help Chris Taylor that it would be unable to level the playing field if somebody really wanted to.
This is Capital Notes. I'm Maayan Silver, speaking with J.I. Ross of WisPolitics.com. And how much money would really need to be spent? I've seen reporting that Taylor has raised more than $3.8 million over the past year. I'm sure those numbers have been updated compared to the a little less than $450,000 for Lazar. Yeah. Are those? Yeah. So
we haven't seen anything since before the primary, and I know where they're at right now. But looking at the ad buys, Chris has about $2 million. There's a group called Better Wisconsin Together. They'd spent around a little more than $1 million. Lazar's around $150,000. So again, a big tilt in favor of the liberal side. But $2 million is not a ton of money. If somebody comes in and drops $5 million, just to pick it up out of thin air, that would be dramatically different. I just don't know if anybody wants to spend $5 million right now to help Marie Lazar. So that's the big question. Is there going to be some kind of late surge of money in this race that would change the dynamic?
Okay, so on the latest episode of Capital Notes before this, we talked about outgoing Republican Assembly Speaker Robin Vos and his legacy. He's the longest serving Assembly Speaker in Wisconsin history. Also in the past, we talked about how there was a second recall. There were 2 recall efforts against Vos. The last one was in 2024 because he rejected calls to decertify Biden's win in Wisconsin in 2020. About that recall, late last month, the Wisconsin Elections Commission recommended charges against 13 people involved in it. What can you tell us about this?
So Robin Voss filed a complaint with the Elections Commission about how this thing was conducted, that there were people who didn't fill out the paperwork properly and lied about or put a false address, for example, or that there were people listed who signing that actually hadn't signed the petition. So he filed that complaint, provided evidence. The commission said there is probable cause that something was not right here. We're going to forward it to the local district attorney and say, hey, here you go. Do you want to go after this? Now, here's the question. 2 people are accused of putting a false address as their circulator certificate, right? Like, this is where I live, before I circulate petitions. Another 11 people are accused of collecting false signatures. One, the DA in Racine County got complaints about this before, looked into it and said I couldn't prove it without, beyond a reasonable doubt, so I didn't go forward with it. What might be different this time with the information he's getting now from the Elections Commission? Will it be easier? Is there new information in there? You haven't seen those files. 2, I think most of the people who are involved who are accused of wrongdoing live out of state. If you are a local district attorney, how much effort are you going to put into tracking down people who live in, pick your state, who does this for a living? How much effort are you putting into tracking them down when you have other things to worry about? So I don't know if this is going to produce a different result, but at very least, the commission is saying there is probable cause here that something was amiss. Now, one thing to keep in mind, there has been legislation percolating in the Capitol that would require you to be a state resident or state voter, essentially, to circulate nomination papers and recall petitions if you are for a state office. It would kind of eliminate these kind of people who come in from out of state who are paid by the signature or the page or whatever to collect signatures. It would kind of end that practice. It wouldn't apply to federal races, I believe, remember correctly, but it would make it different for, like a recall petition against a member of the Assembly or Senate or constitutional office, because you couldn't have people paid from out of state to do this anymore. It might address some of this stuff. It also might make it harder for people to get these petitions filled out because it takes a lot of manpower to go out and collect these things.
Yeah, so there are a bunch of moving parts there. We'll see what happens. Shifting gears a little bit, Democratic Governor Tony Evers kept his promise from the State of the State address last month, and he called for a special session this spring to take up a constitutional amendment to ban partisan gerrymandering. He can't force lawmakers to actually meet, and GOP leaders have regularly ignored his directives. Any signs this will be different?
No. I mean, Robin Voss did keep the door open a crack, just saying, hey, we'll negotiate with the governor. We'll open this idea. But, in talking to Democrats, they, one, don't trust Republicans on this topic. 2, there are lots of moving pieces here. The amendment Evers proposed is very simple. It says, districts shall not provide a disproportionate advantage to or disadvantage to any political party, period. Partisan gerrymandering is prohibited, period. Well, what's that mean? How do you define partisan gerrymandering? How do you define a disproportionate advantage or disadvantage, right? What would your process be to draw maps? Do lawmakers draw the maps but have to meet certain benchmarks? Is there a commission? What would this look like? It's really kind of up in the air. And so I get the impression from lawmakers are not really rushing to embrace this because of that. I mean, we're at the end of the session. Constitutional amendments you have to go past back-to-back sessions and then go to the voters for a referendum. We won't draw maps till 2031. So in theory, if you pass this amendment this session, you come back to it in January, it could be on the ballot in April of 2027, but you don't need it till 2031. You have a couple sessions to get this done, some more elections to go through, so there's no rush in that regard. And there's also this kind of this kind of theme in the back or thought in the back for Democrats of, okay, wait a second. One, we might get a trifecta in the Capitol that we could draw maps on our own for the first time. Of course, this is way in advance, right? We're talking 2030 elections. That is way far down the road. What's that going to look like? Oh, if we don't, if there's a Democratic president in 2029 and 2030 is a bad year for us in the midterms, we are more likely to have a majority in the state Supreme Court, which has already ruled maps Republicans drew unconstitutional. We have a backstop. So I get the impression that Democrats maybe one, are not quite rushing to embrace this for some logistical reasons, but also kind of thinking, we might have a pretty good backstop in that state Supreme Court. We can't rely on it necessarily or like predict what it'll do, but we've already seen where they're at when it comes to these things. We might, feel okay that if the court drew the map in 2031, what that would mean for us politically.
Very interesting. Okay, well, thanks for this background, JR. And as always, it's great to have you on Capital Notes.
Anytime. Thanks for having me.
That was J.R. Ross, editor of WisPolitics.com, speaking with me, WUWM's Maayan Silver. Listen for our segments every other Monday with an extended segment on Lake Effect, and check out the Capital Notes podcast wherever you get your podcasts.